Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Transmedia Arts Seminar. My name is Magda Romanska, and I am a co-host of the seminar with my colleague Ramona. This seminar is co-sponsored by the Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard and Meta Lab at Harvard. We are both very grateful to the two centers for hosting us. Today, we have a very special guest, and I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Ramona, who will introduce them. We are thrilled to welcome them, and we look very much forward to their lecture.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be welcoming Kai Tuchmann and Anuja Ghosalkar, and I'm very excited about this session. So today, this will be the final session of this season for the Transmedia Arts Seminar. And I'll briefly introduce Anuja and Kai, and then they will take over. So Anuja Ghosalkar is the founder of Drama Queen, which is a documentary theatre company, and she's been working on within the form of this company since 2015 in India. Her practice is very much focused on questions of personal histories, archival absences, and questions of documentation, also blurring the boundaries between and hierarchies between audience and performer, to extend the concept of theatre as such. So, and she's also been showing her work internationally at the University of Oxford, at the Sophienseele here in Berlin, Serendipity Arts Festival, National Center of Biological Sciences, and Forum Transregionale, amongst others. She's a guest faculty at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, and she's also written on film and performance for the Nang magazine, Art India, Bioscope, and for an edited volume on performance making and the archive for Routledge, which I think sounds fascinating, and I'm definitely checking out. So she is the 2022 Research Fellow at the Archives of the National Center of Biological Studies. And Kai is not only a dear friend, but also a dramaturg, director, and academic who holds a degree in directing from the Academy for Acting Ernst Busch in Berlin. He's a visiting professor of the Central Academy of Drama in Beijing and helped to set up a new BA in dramaturgy there. His performance work kind of focuses on explorations of documentary theatre, and he has been kind of exploring topics like the Cultural Revolution in contemporary, how that kind of reflects still in contemporary China, the impact of urbanization on migrant workers in Europe and China, and the role of the body in digital technologies. His stagings have been shown at Dance Hong Kong, the Zurich Theaterspektakel Festival Autumn Paris, and the Documenta Institute, among others. He holds also a degree, he's also on the advisory board, more so, of the Marvin Carlson Center at the Shanghai Theatre Academy. And together, they have been collaborating on questions of documentation and digitality, and they will be talking about their work now to us and showing us lots of different examples. And we're just very, very thrilled to be here, because I think just the combination of digitality and forms of documentation is particularly interesting, and we're thrilled to have you. So thank you so much for making the time and sharing your work. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Magda. Thank you, Ramona, for this introduction, and most of all for the chance with which you provided us, so that we have the chance to talk about our work, and in particular our project, Look, Here Is Your Machine, Get In. This is a project that Anuja and me curated for the Serendipity Arts Foundation Virtual Festival. And we started the preparations for this project in April 2020, basically against the backdrop of the pandemic. And from this very beginning, we conceived our project as an archive of 269 days. And these are the 269 days that would lie between the first day of the lockdown in India, which happened at 25th March 2020, and the day of our premiere, which was supposed to be, and in fact was, at December 16th, 2020. So maybe an additional note on the title of this project. Look, here is your machine, get in. These two lines basically refer to the beginning of the libretto that Bertolt Brecht wrote 1929 for his radio play Lindbergh's Flight. And this play could be regarded as a very early example of media theater because it made the technology of the radio a co-actor. And radio back then was kind of brand new. It was just like 6 years before Brecht wrote that play that this technology was to introduce to Germany at all. So in the center of his media experiment, Bertolt Brecht put the character of Charles Lindbergh.
Lindbergh was the first human being to have piloted a flight across the Atlantic. He did it solo in 1927. And by doing so, he radically changed our ideas about what movement, mobility are, and thus he also deeply affected the very idea of what a human being is. This flight turned Lindbergh into the first media-made celebrity of the 20th century. Brecht merges the heroic story of this pioneering airman with the pioneering technology of the radio. In essence, the brief plot of Lindbergh's flight in a handful of scenes depicts how Lindbergh takes off from New York, overcomes the dangers of a storm, snow, sleeplessness, and eventually lands his plane, Spirit of St. Louis, in Paris.
Vorstellung des Fliegers.
Introduction of the American airman, Mr. Charles Lindbergh.
Présentation de l'aviateur Charles Lindbergh.
Mein Name ist Charles Lindbergh. Ich bin 25 Jahre alt. Mein Großvater war Schwede. Ich bin Amerikaner. Meinen Apparat hab ich selber ausgesucht. Er fliegt 210 Kilometer in der Stunde. Sein Name ist Geist von St. Louis. Die Reihe.
As curators, Anuja and me were particularly interested in Brecht's hope for the medium of the radio. And his hope was, and I will quote now, the flight of the Lindbergh is not intended to be of use to the present-day radio, but to change it. The increasing concentration of mechanical means and the increasingly specialized education call for a kind of rebellion by the listener, for his mobilization and redeployment as producer. So what Brecht dreamt of, that was a radio that could empower people by transforming this one-way communication apparatus into a network, which allows everyone to be receiver and a producer of messages.
Almost 100 years after Brecht's media experiment, there's no other way than to conclude that Brecht's hopes in the radio failed. Just 4 years after the premiere of Lindbergh's flight, the Nazi regime turned the radio into their most powerful tool for propaganda, which they used in order to systematically dehumanize certain groups of people, making the radio into the first weapon of media violence.
Almost 100 years after Brecht's media experiment, we have to deal with this disappointment. And this disappointment around his play was not just connected to the misuse of radio technology by the Nazi Party, but also to the political commitments of its main character. Charles Lindbergh himself became a supporter of the German National Socialists in the 1940s. He founded the America First Committee during the Second World War, which agitated for American isolationism and supported anti-Semitism.
On December 19, 1949, 20 years after the premiere, Brecht was asked by the South German radio to give his permission for a broadcast of Lindbergh's flight. He reluctantly answered on 2nd January 1950. He said,
"Gentlemen, if you wish to broadcast Lindbergh's flight as a part of a historical survey, I must ask you to add a prologue and to make a few slight changes in the text. Lindbergh is known to have had close ties with the Nazis. His enthusiastic report on the unconquerable German Air Force had a paralyzing effect in several countries. Lindbergh also played a sinister role as a fascist in the USA. The title of my radio play must therefore be changed to The Ocean Flight, and the prologue must be spoken, and the name of Lindbergh must never be mentioned again."
Auf dem Flugplatz Le Bourget bei Paris erwartet in der Nacht des 21. Mai 1927 abends 10 Uhr eine riesige Menge den amerikanischen Flieger.
On the night of the 21st of May 1927, an enormous crowd gathered on the aerodrome Le Bourget near Paris is awaiting the arrival of the American airmen.
À l'aérodrome du Bourget, près de Paris, dans la nuit du 21 mai 1927, à 22 heures, une foule immense attend l'aviateur américain.
The analogy between the radio and the internet is striking. With our project, we wanted to revisit this early media experiment, especially this moment of the pandemic, when we all became so dependent on the internet. Internet access is not free and equal for all. That its history is disordered and checkered is obvious, but perhaps needs reiteration. Working on this project amplified this. All our artists come from different backgrounds, means, levels of censorship, and we're forced to ask, the promise of the internet, what's that? Our artists from Sri Lanka and China were not even able to access their own work exhibited in "Look, here's your machine, get in." And yet, as artists, we must grapple with this technology, this form.
Thus, our question was, what does Brecht's failed hope mean to us today when we think about the intersection of technology, society, and art? Where and how can we learn from it? We asked our artists to produce works that comment on these questions. Their responses constituted a unique archive of the 269 days of the pandemic and its effects on the public sphere and on our cultural life and on our political life.
The artists of our projects are responding to Bertolt Brecht's imagination. that he could involve invisible audiences to sing major parts of the libretto. When we conceived Look, Here's Your Machine, Get In, we imagined our audiences to appear as avatars in a virtual space when physical theaters were closed. We decided to use the open source, lesser known Mozilla Hubs platform for this experience. Mozilla Hubs is an online virtual reality platform that one can access with or without headsets.
And to share this particular experience of Mozilla Hubs with you today, we will show you now one of our 8 virtual rooms called The Myth Box by Ranjit Kandalagokar. In the Myth Box, we see an interfusion of line drawings, archival materials from the Bombay plague in the late 1900s, rumor-mongering bets, miasma theories, misconceptions, and histories of diseases and infections flying through the air. This is presented in the backdrop of The Spirit of St. Louis, the unique custom-built high-wing monoplane Charles Lindbergh flew for the first solo transatlantic flight ever, making every kind of travel possible, even for a future virus.
The virtual space asks us to be innovators again, as if we're at the beginning of time and maybe transpose ourselves to a time of wonder.
Perhaps the way audiences who might have experienced the Lumiere's brothers' arrival of the train, a moving object coming at them at great speed, the ideas of embodiment, breath, witnessing alter significantly in this virtual reality space. How you move, what you hear, see, distance, height, volume, every variable is controlled by your avatar. And are we ready for it? Are we and our technology not natural as yet? So what all of you now just attended was more or less the same prologue to Look, Here Is Your Machine, Get In, that Anuja and me performed back in 2020. Back then, we also performed this prologue on Zoom before we took our audiences to the Mozilla Hub spaces of our artists.
We decided to talk about Look, Here's Your Machine, Get In because it highlights one particular aspect of the digital that one thinks of too little. In addition to the digital being an artistic device, it is also an infrastructure. What this means is that the digital is a mode of how and on which one can also rehearse, network, and organize. And this is exactly what Look, Here's Your Machine is about. Look, Here Is Your Machine became a theater festival in VR. In this context, it is important to let you know that Kai and I have been working together between India and Germany almost for 10 years now. Our focus is on producing theatre works, discourse, platforms in the field of documentary theatre, a genre that historically, if one were to think of Peter Weiss, for example, understands theatre as a practice of testimony making. A highlight of our collaboration on these documentary forms was when we hosted a major symposium called Connecting Realities in Goa in December 2019. Our curatorial question for Connecting Realities was, from where within the Indian and the Asian performance practices, both traditional and contemporary, could one connect to or iterate the traditions of documentary theatre? We invited performers, scholars of performance, theatre artists, but also lawyers, human rights activists, journalists, and educators to engage with our audience and us. And we recorded these proceedings of a symposium online and in a website, which is free and accessible to all. I'm going to post it in chat just now, the link for it, so that you can see it and access it after this talk, perhaps. And I'm just going to call it out, www.connectingrealities.org.
And initially, Anuja and me regarded this symposium, Connecting Realities, as what we always called a curatorial jam session that should help us to deduce approaches towards a physical documentary theater festival that we were planning to hold by the end of 2020. But in March 2020, India found itself in lockdown, and any approach towards physical theater was out of the question. However, we had now formed this momentum and gathered a great collective of artists and accomplices around us. So we didn't want to let this momentum pass. And after consulting friends, especially from the visual art field, like Fabian Hesse, we decided to hold our documentary theater festival virtually on a software that he recommended to us, namely Mozilla Hubs. And this idea eventually then became the starting point for Look, Here Is Your Machine, Get In.
Here, I want to briefly also hint at the specific situatedness and the relevance of documentary forms in India at present. The Indian society is stratified with the document. The document is the privilege of the moneyed and the few. In Connecting Realities, as well as when we were conceiving Look, Here Is Your Machine, both these events actually coincided with the biggest people's protest in recent Indian history. This protest was against the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, which forces individuals in India to document their ancestry. Therefore, internal migration and natural and manufactured disasters particularly affect and target marginalized and displaced populations who struggled and even today continue to struggle to produce documents as evidence of ancestry and exposes them to the threat of deportation. This circumstance became the dominant backdrop for our practice that the opening speaker of our Connecting Reality Symposium, Rustam Bharucha, he called this a perverse documentary theater of the state, which then informed our attempt of revisioning the aesthetics and the histories of documentary theater, that under these conditions turn into a protest against the state and the state's use of documents. The pandemic then enabled the government to conceal the devastating effects of CAA and even to reinforce its logic in the name of public health. The works in Look, Here's Your Machine, Get In intervened and responded to this violence by constructing artistic testimonies from diverse and non-hegemonic perspectives from within the Indian society.
So at the very basis of our concept for Look, Here Is Your Machine, Get In then was to see how this intersection of the use of technology and the societal changes that Anuja talked about were intersecting. And we wanted our 9 artists that we invited to create testimonies that intervene into this intersection. So one could say that these works then are situated between discourses of technophobic pessimism and transhuman calls for enhancement. For our project, digital technology is just understood as a necessary agent in the vital project of imagining survival.
This creation of a testimony was made possible by Ali Asghar Dhariwala and Gavati Wad, who were our technical developers and also artist designers that created 8 virtual spaces. Of course, they did this in close collaboration with our 9 participating and invited artists. These are the names of the artists alphabetically. The 9 artists were Amitesh Grover, A. Mangai, Aisha Susan Thomas, Ranjit Khandalgaonkar, Soumyabrata Chaudhary, Venkat Srinivasan, Yalgar Sanskritik Manch, Zhao Chuan, and Zulekha Chaudhary. Perhaps some of the artists are also listening in today. For now, we're going to share 4 out of these 9 works. And the 4 works that we want to share in detail are Soumyabrata Chaudhary, Yalgar, Amitesh Grover, and Zulekha Chaudhary. We will try to give you an idea of some of these rooms by showing you selected video documentation of them. All the videos that we're about to show you, they are screen recordings from the Hubs rooms of our artists that we created while walking alone as avatars through this work. The digital space when one walks alone is quite interesting. So it was like lonely walking without our audiences this time. So the audience avatars didn't exist. It was me and Kai on our own wandering through these digital rooms. And we did that particularly for this talk. What we want to also focus on is how our artists utilize the Hubs VR as a way to stay with the trouble during the pandemic by using their practice as a witness to and testimony of significant changes in Indian society. When the pandemic hit, the CAA protests were at their peak, but due to strict lockdown rules, the protesters were no longer allowed to congregate. The protests, which had gathered compelling momentum, were halted abruptly, and the state used the pandemic to keep its citizens confined. During many television and televised speeches, the machinery of the state used terms like Lakshman Rekha, a boundary that Sita in the mythology Ramayana is forbidden to cross for her safety. I will come back to this idea. The first Hubs room that we want to showcase is of theatre scholar Soumyabrata Chaudhary, or Shomu as I will refer to him. Shomu only months earlier during our symposium in Goa had commented on how the demand for documents of existence under the guise of the CAA from religious minorities in Indian society was illegal, because he said no state could capture or validate a human being's existence through a piece of paper. His Hubs room extends this deeply political and philosophical idea of existence, of survival, of documents in relation to CAA, but he also extends it forward to the being of the migrant worker, the walk home of the migrant worker during the pandemic, who, unlike Lindbergh, had deathly journeys due to systemic negligence. I'm going to share the first part of this. Can you see my screen and hear me?
I'm announcing what a great, unbearable announcement this is. I announce a migrant walk, an episodic presentation of 269 social media posts a post each day from 24th March to 15 December 2020, a documentary caricature of Bertolt Brecht's radio play Lindbergh's Flight, based on the historic flight undertaken by Charles Lindbergh, a journey of 2,000 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean from America to Europe on a primitive airplane with a weak engine and no shield against rain, hail, or snow. A testament to the promise that one day, soon, technology will become an organic part of the natural history of humans, and every artless invention will, while extending the limits of the possible, never let us forget the unattainable.
As you witnessed in Shomu's A Migrant Walk, it opens in a vast, empty, stark white theatre. On an actorless stage is a screen on which appear Bertolt Brecht, Samuel Beckett, Laurence Olivier, Antonin Artaud, with a news television-style ticker of text outlining the varied performances by these men of the theatre that use the voice and radiophonic devices. The title, A Migrant Walk. The context of this is that to contain the spread of the coronavirus in India, a nationwide lockdown was announced overnight in March 2020. Battling unemployment and homelessness, the following week saw thousands of migrant workers from Indian cities embarking on perilous journeys on foot, in the absence of any mode of transportation. Even India's vast railway network was mostly shut down. They were trying to walk back to their villages, and they walked for days without food.
One more post. I walk, I'm walking, I keep walking. I walk, I'm walking, I keep walking. One more post. Look at them, they're walking. One more post. I walk, I'm walking, I keep walking. One more post. Look at them, they're walking. One more post. I walk, I'm walking, I keep walking. One more post. Look at them, they're walking. One more post. I walk, I'm walking, I keep walking. One more post. Look at me looking at them walking. One more post. I command. I'm commanding. I keep commanding. I command. हाथ जोड़कर भाइयों और बहनों, I command. आज से अपने घर की दहलीज को लक्ष्मण रेखा समझें और उस पार न जाएं. I command, I'm commanding. हाथ जोड़कर भाइयों और बहनों, आज से.
To come back to the Lakshman Rekha, as I was saying earlier, the Lakshman Rekha is a boundary that Sita in the mythology Ramayana is forbidden to cross for her safety. This metaphor was invoked by many state actors in many televised speeches for the health and safety of the citizens, to keep the populace within the confines of their home at the start of the pandemic. The Lakshman Rekha, if trespassed, brings ill fate, calamity, destruction upon Sita in the myth, and in this instance, the migrants. The crossing of the line of control during the pandemic by thousands of migrants was an act of social transgression for survival. Shomu's Mozilla Hubs room uses phrases from official speeches, underlines the political rhetoric, and sharply focuses on the vacuous bureaucratic language, where human beings are merely a number. The breaching of lines of control in this piece are manifold. The most satirical transgression in this work is the disclaimer when Shomu refers to Bertolt Brecht as a great plagiarist. In another iteration of A Migrant Walk, during an aftertalk, Shomu said of Brecht, "We're all parasites of Brecht's intelligence." This fine line between the reverence and irreverence from a theatre scholar in A Migrant Walk culminates in this deliciously deft disclaimer.
Technology.
Shomu's Hubs room can be viewed as a little commentary on policies during the pandemic, on social media and theatre itself, an agile mode of protest, cloaking a scathing political testimony deep within the Hubs environment. The next room we want to share with you is of a music group from Bombay called Yalgar. They are Ambedkarite singers, and the document central to their writing and their politics is the Constitution of India, written by B.R. Ambedkar. Their songs, their entire practice is transgressive and claims to bring down the fortresses of inequality created by the divisive Indian caste system. Rather than me introduce them, here's a short video of them speaking about their work and ideology through their music. This video was recorded during Connecting Realities, our symposium in December 2019. So this is Yalgar.
कोरस है, ये श्रम परिहार का कला है। हम बस्तियों में, रास्ते पे, मोहल्लों में ज़्यादा प्रोग्राम करते हैं और आज यहाँ पे आए हैं। ये जो हमारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स है, ये पहले गुलामी का प्रतीक हुआ करती थी। अभी समता का जागर करने के लिए ये इंस्ट्रूमेंट हमारे साथ खड़े हैं। खालू जागर, यो जागर, बोला बोला, सब लोग बोलिए। खालू जागर, जागर समतेचा, खालू जागर, जागर समतेचा, खालू जागर, जागर समतेचा, खालू जागर, जागर समतेचा, खालू जागर, जागर समतेचा। तुकोबा कहते हैं हमारे पास जो लड़ने के शस्त्र है, हमारे पास जो परंपरा है, वो शब्दों की परंपरा है। शब्द ही हमारे सब कुछ है।
So this is Yalgar. We had collaborated with them a year earlier as well. And then we invited them to do and to work with us on our Hubs project. Their Hubs room was called Article 51AH, referencing the Indian Constitution pertaining to the development of a scientific temperament, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. In their Hubs piece, they comment on scriptures, on superstition, on nature, on science, urging the audiences to think about a godless world. What happens in a godless world? And would we rather live in a world like that, or should we blindly follow religious dogma? The satire in their Hubs work is also stinging and with deceptive levity, and within the cultural ecology in India that is increasingly being affected by censorship. Sometimes their work escapes through the cracks, and sometimes it doesn't. In Yalgar's work, like Shomu's work, the migrant, the farmer, the disenfranchised find voice. It is noteworthy that Yalgar do not work in English, but they use local languages like Marathi and Hindi that have a resonance with wider audiences in India. And here I want to underline that this was extremely vital for Kai and myself. The use of languages other than English to negotiate with, to work with, and ultimately infringe the inherent Western, English-speaking world-led aesthetic, mode, and medium of Mozilla Hubs. Yalgar chose to place their work in a virtual forest. Just going to share it.
मैं किसान हूँ, आसमान में धान बो रहा हूँ। कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं
वेदाआधी तू होतास, वेदांच्या परमेश्वराआधी तू होतास, पंचमहाभूतांचे पाहून विराट विक्राळ रूप तू व्यथित व्याकुळ होत होतास. आणि हा
मैं किसान हूँ, आसमान में धान बो रहा हूँ। कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं कि पगले आसमान में धान नहीं जमा करते। मैं कहता हूँ पगले, अगर जमीन पे भगवान जम सकता है। मैं किसान हूँ, आसमान में धान बो रहा हूँ। कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं पगले आसमान में धान नहीं जमा करता। मैं कहता हूँ पगले, अगर या फिर आसमान में धान जमेगा। तो आसमान में धान भी जम सकता है, और अब तो दोनों में से कोई एक ही होकर रहेगा। या तो जमीन से भगवान उखड़ेगा या फिर आसमान में धान जमेगा।
So Anuja now showed us the works of Shomo and Yalgar. I think what both of these works share is that they really juxtapose this techno-optimism that underlies Brecht's play with a very hard reality and hard situation that was enforced on migrants in the post-pandemic situation or in the pandemic situation. I now want to close this presentation by highlighting two other works that take their point of departure not from a resonance with the Brecht play, but rather with Brecht's radio theory. So the first piece I want to introduce in this context is Suleika Chaudhry's Rehearsing Azad Hind Radio, which is a 9 minutes adaptation from the video work of the same name, originally commissioned for the Berlin Biennale in 2018, that Suleika then exclusively recreated for our VR project. Rehearsing Azad Hind Radio reenacts selected broadcasts that the Indian nationalist Subhash Chandra Bose made from Berlin. Bose was collaborating with Hitler in the early 1940s in order to set up the Azad Hind Radio, which was a radio station whose aim it was to promote a culture of Indian nationalism. In Rehearsing Azad Hind Radio, we are inhabiting simultaneous temporalities, witnessing both through our embodied avatars and our collective memories taking us back to history.
Cooperate with any nation that will help us in regaining our independence. India has decided to fight for her freedom. She will not only free herself, but will free Asia and even the whole world.
Indians should, therefore, extend their wholehearted cooperation to the Axis powers and fight side by side with them. Those who refuse to take part in the Indian War of Independence are traitors.
But remember that you will have to pay the price of freedom. Freedom can never be had by begging. It has to be got by force. Its price is blood.
शुभ सुख चैन की बरखा बरसे भारत भाग है जागा सूरज बनकर जग पे चमके भारत नाम सुहागा जय हो जय हो जय हो.
A word is necessary here as to what exactly is meant by leftism. When different individuals and organizations claim to be leftists, how are we to decide who are and are not genuine leftists? In the present political phase of Indian life, leftism means anti-imperialism. A genuine anti-imperialist is one who believes in undiluted independence as the political objective and in uncompromising national struggle as the means for attaining it. After the attainment of political independence, leftism will mean socialism, and the task before the people will then be the reconstruction of national life on a socialist basis. Genuine anti-imperialists, that is leftists, have always to fight on two fronts. So also in India, they have to fight on one side foreign imperialism and its Indian allies, and on the other, our milk and water nationalists, the rightists, who are prepared for a deal with imperialism. In the case of present-day India, the rightists will stoop to any degree of ruthlessness in their persecution of the leftists, because they have had a taste of power and are determined to monopolize it for themselves in future by rooting out all opposition. To carry on a struggle on two fronts simultaneously and to face the above twofold persecution is not an easy affair.
Standing in the sparse virtual room with the voice of an actor rehearsing and preparing to enact both, the historic political context gradually starts to recede into the background. One hears instead the humanizing account by Avik Sen, who speaks of what it meant to him to transform into Bose's character, whose ideological commitments were very different from his own. He speaks of his transformation as a transformation of his present existence into Bose's past.
What or who was this other person, physically recreated through the texts of Bose's broadcasts and through photographic images? One should always distinguish between the unity of action. The space that I was inhabiting when I played the character of Bose was the authenticity or conviction, the truth with which he had felt, or I feel he had felt, the primarily political emotions and ideologies expressed in the speech and pledge. Emotions and ideologies that were utterly alien, even repugnant to me in my own person, if I were to think rationally and intellectually about and into them. All these different political things about him, these were as fundamentally other to me as the thickened eyebrow and moustache, the beard and the double-breasted suit that I had put on to get into the character of Bose. And this, I would repeat, was not empathy. Yet the process of coming to this realization of what he may have been like was a profoundly transformative experience. It was a transformation of one's identity. I would even go as far as to say that it was a transformation of one's sexual identity. I had become another kind of man. I had become another kind of male creature when I played Bose, with regard to what I wore, with regard to my voice, my secondary sexual characteristics. Will come the end of the British Empire in India. Try it once. Then will come the end. This was also a transformation of my present into his past. And in that sense, not only an ideological or ontological, but also a historical transformation. I had entered into a kind of realization of a bit of history. What I'm trying to describe was not a personal or subjective experience, but an interpersonal or intersubjective one. The evolution of a movement is analogous. Perhaps this is what makes such a transformation or transaction between a self and another, in a precise sense, dialectical, dialogic, or dialogic, or, to appropriate Bose's favorite political vocabulary, This is the synthesis, the reconciliation, but without conciliation, of opposites, the reconciliation of opposites that happens when a thesis enters into a lived relationship with its antithesis. Considering everything, one is inclined to hold that the next phase in world history will produce a synthesis between communism and fascism. And will it be a surprise if that synthesis is produced in India?
Suleka's work creates a very carefully crafted confrontation between Brecht's radio theory, which wanted to turn the radio into a two-way communication apparatus, and Bose's appropriation of radio technology. Collaborating with the NS regime enabled Bose to eventually raise his voice against the British colonialism, and to some extent this collaboration turned the radio into a two-way communication apparatus. Suleka's work bears testimony to this brutal political ambivalence, which actually is inscribed into the use of any technology. The radio waves of these times, transmitting the news of Charles Lindbergh's journey across the Atlantic, made him a celebrity. Brecht dissociated from Lindbergh and altered the title of his play because of Lindbergh's close associations with the Nazis. Bose worked closely with the fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany in an attempt to free India from the British. His potent weapon of choice, along with an army, is the radio. How and where does one begin to absorb, process, assimilate these contradictions? The complexity of the response perhaps lies in Suleka's artwork itself, where the actor playing Bose at some point says, "A broadcast is both an entry and an exit. I enter you as pure sound, but I may not be reached."
In spite of the antithesis between communism and fascism, there are certain traits common to both. Both communism and fascism believe in the supremacy of the state over the individual. Both denounce parliamentary democracy. Both believe in party rule. Both believe in the dictatorship of the party and the ruthless suppression of all dissenting minorities. Both believe in a planned industrial reorganization of the country. The common traits will form the basis of the new synthesis. I would call such a synthesis Samyavada, an Indian word which means literally the doctrine of synthesis or equality. And it will be India's task to work out this synthesis. A broadcast is both an entry and an exit. I enter you as pure sound, but I may not be reached. I speak of the masses. I stand before the masses, like a conductor before an orchestra, the one against the many. Oratory, oratorio. Words become music, but with the theatre taken away.
The last work that I want to present to you now is also dwelling on the very nature of broadcasting. But while Suleka's work emphasizes the ideological asynchronicities of this technology, Amitesh Grover's approach starts from the idea of a speculative fiction. In Amitesh Grover's radiophonic event, titled Making Speech with Invisible Partners. He invites the audience to listen to a broadcast sent from the future. Amitesh's work unpacks ideas of control and regulation of airwaves and calls for a charter for freeing air from the policing and symbolic order of the public domain, while ironically placing itself in the vacuum of a virtual space. Anuja and me were very interested in Amitesh's focus on air, not just bringing to our attention the pandemic with its harsh impact on the possibilities of breathing the same air. Much more, Making Speech with Invisible Partners constructed a powerful testimony of the present moment by providing our audience with an imagination for overcoming the numerous environments of thin air, literally and metaphorically understood, that threaten our democracies. Honoring the fact that Amitesh initially conceived Making Speech with Invisible Partners as a soundscape, we will now refrain from showing you his Mozilla Hubs space and rather invite you to listen to the last 4.5 minutes of the work, which then will also mark the end of Anuja's and my presentation.
This broadcast declares a charter for airwaves. This charter is a statement of principles concerning airwaves, and the future flights that might be taken through the air of symbols, possibilities, and freedoms. Let us hear the charter now. Number 1, air is nomadic. It exists only when it wanders, when it flows from one place to another. Its nomadism must be supported, enabled, and encouraged. Air must be received as a gift and offered as a gift. Number 2, air is not public property. It is neither public nor property, but it is present for itself. As we move through air and move things through air, we must treat air as a passage that is allowing us to move freely and with grace. Number 3, air is not a resource. Notions inscribed in air as an inextractable resource are ill-founded. Air is sculpture that floats on its own accord, dances, rages, and rests when it wants. Air has its own body. Number 4, air is exceptional. The ubiquity of air on a planet has misled us to believe that air is ordinary, found everywhere, and as such does not deserve our attention. Air is extraordinary, in the sense that it is unique to our environment. In fact, it is the environment. Environments have lives too. They have a past, they have a present, and they have a future. Number 5, air is dynamic. Everybody knows that air is dynamic in one sense or another, but air is also dynamic in the sense that it lives and dies as it passes through the living and the non-living things on our planet. Number 6, you never breathe the same air twice. Every time you breathe, it is a new, different gasp of air that has entered your being. And this new, different gasp of air will replenish you with life that it has carried with itself from elsewhere. Number 7, air needs to be demilitarized. A century of warfare filled with air fleets, dropping air torpedoes and destroying whole fortresses and cities from the sky, needs to stop immediately. After a century of technological conquest, we need to conceive of a demilitarized sky. Number 8, air unites space and time with the cosmos. Air is the impossibility of dividing the entangled relationship of things. Number 9, bubbles, spheres, clouds, patterns, and webs are all forms of air. Number 10. Air is a spectacle. Enmeshed in the junction of these worlds of air, of bodies suspended in air, of communities bonding by breathing together, and of immersion in air, this broadcast proposes an aerial solidarity with everyone who is listening in right now. Our virtual and real planet urgently needs a social, mental, and environmental movement to bring to air a new understanding, a new aesthetic, a new sense of habitat, without which any flight in the future will be impossible through air. Air has rights.
Mr. Charles Lindbergh started New York on his flight to Europe.
L'aviateur Charles Lindbergh, en son vol à New York.
Thank you so much for your talk and this incredible performative tour, really, through the exhibition and all the different contributions. It's really amazing and fascinating what you put together in this, really. And I maybe want to start with one question before we open it up to the audience, or and have a little discussion with you. So what struck me most, I think, is how complex and sophisticated a media experiment this is, and it's quite thrilling to sort of listen to also the breadth of contributions that then always tie back together with this sort of Brechtian moment. And I'm kind of wondering overall, in a way, what happens to the idea of a historical document when it's presented virtually, or what happens to the idea of documents as such, and how does our relationship to its status within history sort of change? Because I was very struck by the sort of tension between the different media, by sort of how much the Mozilla Hubs in a way recedes into the background, and you're sort of then engaging with all these other sort of media forms, and I was wondering, yeah, whether you can talk more about that process and how these different media reflect on each other in a way. Because usually it could be Anuja, Kai, whoever. I mean, usually what strikes me when I'm in, especially a VR virtual room and something like Mozilla Hubs, is that the environment takes over so much that, especially the visual aspect of it, that that in a way you are almost always experimenting with just that space, and what you manage is actually get us out of that space into a dialogue with history and with different forms of media documents, and that is really fascinating. And that then, and I'm just kind of wondering how that process really worked and how you managed to do that.
I mean, thank you for this description, this observation of yours. And I think this is pretty much like what we tried to make as a point, right? So this whole engagement with Mozilla Hubs, so we are not primarily considering it as like messing around with a new aesthetic device, But very early on, we were really interested in treating it as an infrastructure. And I think Anuja mentioned that in this presentation, right? When we say the digital, especially in the last, I mean, induced through the pandemic in the last 3-4 years, the digital now is this new shiny object in town. Everybody wants to touch it, wants to do some AI, some VR, some whatever. And yeah, I mean, and this is all in its right. And of course, we all also know it's not really that new. These discourses are going very much back. This might also be a reason why we chose Brecht as a point of reference. But this is this whole thing of phenomenology, of aesthetic device. But what we really wanted was a software, an infrastructure that is able to hold our process, which comes from this documentary theater angle. And that was the way how we worked with the Mozilla Hub, and also how our artists work with it, and also our two tech designers, Ali and Gawati, like together with the artists, basically, they built these spaces in that sense that they are becoming carrier of documents. And container of documents. And I think, of course, our understanding is not that a document like shows you how a real event really truthfully has been, like in that historicist sense, but rather that, of course, it's always the time, the here and now, through which you access the documents also shapes it. And it's the dynamic of accessing a document that unfolds it. And I think we conceive these Mozilla Hub spaces as spaces that allow us to unfold these documents to some extent. Anuja, maybe you.
No, I just wanted to add one more thing to what you said. I also think that there were early days of us experimenting with technology. So we had hubs, we had Brecht, and we had the Media Works. And I think some credit is also due to the 9 artists that we work with. I think a lot of it is what they believe in, and what we said at the start of the talk. We were coming from a very politically charged India just before the pandemic. If you were an artist in India, there was no way you could not respond to it. And our symposium had that backdrop, and we invited 9 out of those 20 artists who had already gone through this political moment with us in 2019. So when we come to 2020, we already feel it. And we were feeling it even more. And I think that the notion of what the document is, like we started saying with Shomu's room, where Shomu says documents of existence are invalid, how do you produce it? And I think all the artists sort of resonate with the politics of that. And they stay with it. And I think it was just where we were in the moment in time historically in India as well. I also think 3 years later, we're able to see this. And I think if you give us 3 more years, we might be able to see this historical moment with even more depth, perhaps. And I do have a feeling that what we started in December 2019 finds resonance in 2020 when we make hubs.
And I think this like dealing with something that was very new to us, because like I said in my contribution that so we just discovered hubs like in March 2020. So through a conversation with a dear friend who comes from the visual arts field, and they already had a big experiments with this kind of what actually is a business customized software, right? So where just 25 businessmen meet and doing fancy talk about capitalistic things in some virtual environments. But it was free out there. It was a free software, and it allowed for kinds of modularization. So we started to game with it and started to make it our own. And to some extent, I feel that this is another very interesting thing about this resonance with Bertolt Brecht, who kind of did the same thing with the radio, which was also a new shiny thing back then, and it triggered so many hopes, especially on the socialist side of the modern project, because right through the technology you might arrive at new forms of disruptive forms of distribution, wealth and information and whatever, and Brecht bought into that. And when I was then reading about like first radio plays in the Weimar Republic in Germany, it was also so astonishing to see the return of kind of the similar problems that you had when you were working in VR. Like people couldn't really receive signals clearly back in the radio days. So same was true that for a lot of people, it was hard really to have a fluid perception of the Mozilla Hubscape. So the avatars were not really moving fluently, depending on your bandwidth, depending on where you logged in from a rural side or for an urban side. So there were so many parallels that also held the work in this new and that was back then new for us technology that held that together.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think this idea of a container of documents is really interesting because also, I mean, obviously because of just the artificiality of the environment of Mozilla Hubs, right? Any other document, therefore, then also becomes, you know, the whatever supposed truth status becomes totally questioned just by it being there. You don't even need to do anything much anymore, I think, in some ways, which I think is really fascinating. And the other thing, you know, I feel there's so many discussions about the politics of, you know, how you as a theater artist or performance artist are kind of using digital media, and how you you know, how much in what ways you're sort of buying into sort of the big tech corporations, etc. And I think the ways in which your work now kind of misuses or changes the use of Mozilla Hubs in a way, and highlights through the kind of historical leap and dialogue that you are creating with a question of socialism and fascism. Through that act in and of itself, you're sort of also highlighting the questions of technology and warfare, obviously, today. And so in a way, I think it's a much cleverer sort of approach to sort of engaging with digital media and the questions or the politics of digitality today through history, in a way, through that sort of like leap and loop. And I thought that was really really another very interesting aspect of the exhibition and how you put it together. So I thought the framing of that was really beautiful. And a great way of getting around the, you know, making a disclaimer at the beginning or something like that.
Do we have any questions from our audience members? If anybody has a question, please, you can put them in chat or in Q&A. I really appreciated and I really loved your reframing of the concept of documentary theater as a kind of regulatory regime of contemporary global politics. Yeah. Yeah, I want to mention subjected to relationship between the state and the tech across the borders. So, you know, interrogating that documentary theater of digitality and politics and global power balance between, you know, the major power players, tracking that will be quite interesting to watch. And that concept and the framing of the documentary theater really helps open up this space of you know, the analytical space of how to think about documenting human beings. Yeah, and how to think about the documentation of relationships between different political players across you know, global landscape of global politics. So I really appreciated that reframing. It really opened up some thoughts that I did not really think about before. So that was, you know, I think very important in the way that you guys approached it. All right, do we have other participants who want to join in? If we don't, then
I have one question.
Go ahead, Ramona, sorry.
It's about Brecht, really. I mean, I think Brecht obviously, you know, makes a lot of sense in many ways because of you're stressing the media, him as a kind of media artist and media theorist, and I think that's very true. I'm kind of wondering though also about like, in what, what's the status of Brecht today, and how is he viewed from a sort of Indian perspective? Because I know that Brecht, at least last time I was in India, was a very important kind of figure in terms of, a dramatic figure, and in terms of theatre, political theatre, etc. And I was wondering in how far that was also really, how much you use Brecht also as a bridge there between cultures, maybe.
He's still a very important figure, I think, in contemporary theatre history and in theatre history. And I think what was also interesting is that there were people like Yalgar who may have read Brecht in an Indian language. He's translated in many languages. I find that quite interesting as well, that they may have read his plays, and they're done in like most Indian languages. So to get a non-English speaking people to respond to this was, for me, the most exciting part. And they looked at Brecht in ways that was very, very local to their understanding of it. So in a way, the danger is that Brecht may become Shakespeare. I don't know. That could be a worry. But for our purpose, I think it played well because everybody had accessed him in different languages. As students of theatre, perhaps somebody had. I think most people knew his work quite well. So they accessed them from their points of view. And what was exciting is that they read it in a language in India. So Brecht translated in an Indian context. So it translates well, but even for like there were visual artists or archivists who work with us. If they had not read Brecht, we gave them the play. We also gave them other supporting documents on radio theory and so on. So they resonated with that. They resonated with larger theories that they could draw from in Brecht's case. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I guess that kind of raises a little bit also the question of language, which I think was there also in your talk, both the kind of multilingualism that you're trying to sort of really kind of strengthen, and I was thinking, especially in the second piece, there also obviously is through the music and questions of indigeneity and other languages that are also coming in that are not necessarily only verbal. And I was fascinated actually by that layering as well. And I was wondering whether you could speak a bit more about that, how myth and that as a totally different realm as well kind of enters into this as another sort of aesthetic in a way.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. We've been thinking about that. We've worked with Yalgar for a long time. And what we found fascinating is that they don't speak English. They work in context outside of my own. I'm an English-speaking city person. They work within cities, but with slum dwellers. But what's even more exciting is that their visual language is very different from the sort of hipster things that we see in galleries or even in the theater. So they use, what they do is that they take Hindu myth, which is very mainstream Brahmin myth, and turn it on its head because they're Dalit and Ambedkarites. So they take it and really question the scriptures. And in one shot, we didn't use the close-up of it. He's holding a scripture and he says, you can't touch the scripture until you don't have a bath, until you're not pure. So that actually piece is very layered. To translate that culturally becomes very hard. But we wanted to include that. And what I find exciting is that their visual aesthetic is very different from, let's say, a Zulekha's or a Shomu's. It's very, very rooted in their context, which I thought pushes our understanding of what can enter hubs. Because hubs also became quite slick now. And I was like, oh my God, but there's a whole bunch of people who may not be able to relate to it. And Yalgar really takes that and makes it their own. So they use a video. Yalgar actually, when they used to join our hubs meetings, they had one computer. So the entire collective would be huddled on one computer. So when we talk about technology, I really mean it's not equal to everybody. I mean, there were times when they got cut out a lot. A lot of their video is shot on their phones. So to me, they really, and I wrote while you were saying, they really transgress this, big data hubs kind of thing by just being there for us. Just their bodies present on hubs, just their language and their songs is transgressive enough in the way we imagined it.
Yeah, no, I thought that was very true. The sort of like how much that sort of like there's such a tension there. That's really interesting. And I guess maybe as a final wrap-up question would be, you said, you were really new to it when you started with this in 2020, and what if you did it, if you were doing another project now, or would you, what kind of, would you do a digital exhibition like that again, or would that not be interesting post-pandemic? And I'm guessing about thinking about digital futures here in the larger sense.
There is a fun but also slightly true aspect when answering this. What the pandemic brought was, especially in the German funding system, in the European funding system, was that a lot of means were made available eventually then to artists, to artist spaces, to cultural institutes, while no performing was possible due to the restrictive laws, but to ask for money for like getting tech devices and doing technological stuff. And it was thought as a means, of course, to keep people busy and in work. But what now has happened is that after the pandemic, suddenly thousands of venues and agents are equipped with VR headsets, with a lot of technology, green screen spaces. And now they have this technology and everybody goes around and is looking for content provider. And which is good for us because this is a rich cosmos that we carry. And of course there are requests, but the thing is, I mean, how to juggle this institutional logic that now seeks content provider and staying true to our process, which has something to do with witnessing and testifying, and also I feel how it kicks in myself now, the joy of being again physically assembled in a rehearsal space with people. So I think maybe if we really could choose, I know Anuja and me, we had this discussion. It would be about like mixed realities. I think that would be interesting. Like having and treating all this cosmos that we created in Look Machine also again as a document, and somehow having this virtually or in a way augmented present while there is also something physical happening. I think like formally that would be interesting for me, and I think that could reconcile both us staying true to our process and also a lot of funding bodies that now wants people to play with their VR sets.
Just to add to that is that, but I think the reverse is happening in India. We are very concerned with a return to purity. This year with Kai we've applied for 3 virtual type of grants and been rejected in India. I think here the thing is, let's go back to the theater. And my question to funders in India, because it's quite opposite of Germany, is why should we return to the theater? We had 2.5 to 3 years where we've managed without the theater. Okay, and it's a provocative question, I understand it. But my question is, why should we return to the theater for what? So yeah, the funding situation is not that good. We've been rejected thrice.
Well, I mean, I think there is obviously this return to the theater idea is also happening in Germany and in Europe as well to some extent. But I think, there's these two things that are happening at the same time. There is a question, though, from Ashish Singupta. Do you want to just ask it? We've just...
Right. Thank you very much, Anuja and Kai, for this brilliant presentation. It was a fascinating experience for me, indeed. I was just wondering, it may not be a very relevant question because I'm not an expert in the field. Is Walter Benjamin, of any relevance to your scheme of things? Because I'm just, remembering his work, that phenomenal work, the work of art in the age of mechanical production. And if you consider the date of publication, 1935, and you also centered the interpretation on Brecht. So the timelines do match. And the background of Nazism is also very relevant there. And I'm thinking about what he called the aura of authenticity. But if you really reproduce mechanically an original work of art, that it also moves out of the private space to the public sphere, and it has a lot of benefit, and which precisely may be a part of your project also, to share, to disseminate, to communicate, and yeah, and to expand the horizons of knowledge.
Well, I maybe to start the answer and then I pass it on to Anuja. But I mean, I already, like in the very first reply to Ramona, I think I referred to the what do you say, the geschichtsphilosophische Thesen, so the thesis on the notion of history by Benjamin, when I said, for us, a document is not recording an event how it really has been, but rather we access it through the time of the here and the now, through the Jetztzeit. So you see, just by this, how meaningful at least his thinking about history and particularly the notion of document is. And I think this dialogue between Brecht and Benjamin is something that in the look machine process, with some artists we really discussed and brought that to a fore, but that always related also to let's say the sentiment and the humor of each individual artist, because some artists really get like turned on if you talk theory and do this kind of cross-cultural theory things. I'm also getting turned on very much by Walter Benjamin, but it's also like, but there are also like individuals that might access work and work process through other ways and channels. So this is all that I can say, and I'm very happy that you are here, since we are both like practitioners and thinkers of the post-traumatic form. So very nice to meet you here. Mr. Sengupta.
Thank you very much, Kai. Thank you.
All right, should we wrap it up? Thank you so much, Kai and Anuja. We are very grateful to have you do this presentation. We are thrilled. And this is a wrap for us for this academic year. This is the last seminar. So we are finishing on the high note, so to speak. And we are thrilled. Again, big thanks to Mahindra Humanity Center and MetaLab for hosting us. And I hope the audiences will tune in next year when we return with a new series and continue our conversation on theater and transmediality and digital revolution, now changed by AI again. So thank you so much.